Can you just state your name and the position you're running for to start off?
Yeah, like name, rank, and serial number.
Pretty much, yeah.
Steve McLaughlin, running for the 107th Assembly District.
Excellent. Can you tell me why you first decided to run for the state assembly? Are you running for your third term now?
Mm-hmm. Running for my third term. Well, why did I first decide to run? A couple of different reasons. One of them was more or less just felt the calling, like I had to get involved because first time I ran was '08. I didn't win in '08, but I ran, and the state was such a dysfunctional mess. The budget was months late. Parks were shut down. It was a complete joke, and I said, well, you know what? I know I can bring some sense of logic and common sense down there. So decided to run. So there was really that pull to get involved in public service, mostly a calling, I would say, with maybe a healthy dose of disgust at what was going on in the state of in the state of New York. So it was a bit of a combination.
Can you tell me what committees you sit on right now?
Yeah, I'm on small business. I'm on economic development. I'm the ranking member on that. I'm on children and families. Tourism, which is sports, tourism. It's kind of a combination of a couple things there. And education, which is a huge committee to be on. So I think I got them all. I don't know if I missed any there, but education, tourism, children and families, and economic development are certainly big committees. So I'm pretty happy with those.
Can you tell me some of the highlights of what you accomplished in your time at the assembly?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been, highlight. It's an interesting thing. I think if you would ask a member of the majority versus or the minority, they're going to give you basically the same answer. It's a lot of it has to do with stuff that nobody ever sees. At least for me, the biggest accomplishments are things that the public never sees. When you can help somebody on an individual basis, it's a pretty big thing. In the general day-to-day scheme of things, what are we doing? We're going down there voting, and nobody really knows. I mean, we vote on hundreds, if not thousands, of bills in a session. Does anybody really know those? Yeah, they know the really big ones that we vote on. So there's some accomplishments there as far as voting goes or advocating for things. But even a member of the majority would tell you it's very difficult to get their own bills passed. They don't get everything they want either. I mean, guys that have been there 20 years, Harvey Wiesenberg, who's just retiring now, would tell you, he's been there 20-something years, can't get his bill through. We just got his CPR bill through, which is a bill that I have advocated for since I got there, along with Harvey. Harvey certainly took the lead on it, but I've been a strong proponent for that, CPR in schools, because it will save lives and it costs literally no money. As something as common sense as that, it still took a long time to get it through, and the governor still hasn't signed it. We're hoping that he signs it fairly soon. Takes one class period to train a kid how to do chest-only compressions. I've had lives saved in my district because of chest-only compressions. So it's a perfect no-brainer. Insurance companies will give us the mannequins. Schools can set aside one health or gym period and do it. So there's an accomplishment factor there. But sometimes it's little things. Sometimes it's naming a bridge, for Derek Farley, who was killed in action. We named the bridge between Schodack and Nassau. Not necessarily the hugest deal to the entire district, but to the people of that area and to his family, a really big deal. So it's a bit of a mix. Those are kind of some of the things that you look to as far as accomplishments go. There are plenty of bills that I've written that have become law that don't even have my name on them as the lead sponsor, because as a member of the minority, you sort of have to hand them off if you have any hope of getting them through. But that's okay. I always say, listen, if the bill gets passed, it gets passed. So to me, the job is not really so much about passing more bills. We have plenty of bills, plenty of laws in New York State. It's about what can you do on an individual basis to help those people. It could be getting somebody a liquor license so that they can open up their pizza shop in New Lebanon. It could be, getting the government out of the way of something. It could be getting a speed limit lowered, or bringing attention to a road that needs repair. So there's all kinds of different things that you can point to, but overwhelmingly for me, it's helping the individual that makes the most difference, I think.
Can you tell me about legislation that you've sponsored or co-sponsored that either has or hasn't been able to get passed?
Well, yeah, there's tons and tons that I've sponsored and co-sponsored. Paperless legislature is one of the ones that we're hopeful that we can get signed by the governor, where would save us about $13 million a year in printing costs. That's something that you can look to and say, well, it's $13 million that we could then maybe, obviously the state can use it, redirect it somewhere else. We're hopeful that the governor signs that. We don't know if he will. He said as of yesterday he hasn't taken a position on it. I'm not sure how you don't take a position on that, but he hasn't yet. So we're hopeful that he signs it. That's something that every single person in there. 4 years ago when I arrived, Mark Molinaro had an iPad, and it was almost an anomaly. They were still, even 4 years ago, weren't that prevalent inside the chamber. Now every desk has a laptop or an iPad on it. We do not need stacks and stacks of paper underneath our desk. It's a complete waste of money, a complete waste of time. Nobody reads it at all because they shrink 4 pages onto 1 page, so the printing is, even if you had 20-year-old eyes, you'd have a real problem reading this stuff. It's not meant to be read, it's meant for show. Waste of time, waste of money. There's one thing. Lots and lots of corruption bills that I've sponsored, anti-corruption bills. Committed crime as a sitting legislator, you should have your pension stripped away. I've sponsored bills for something that keeps popping up and just popped up again a few weeks ago with Bill Scarborough, is the complete abuse of the per diem system. That clearly the honor system doesn't work up there. So if you guys go out on behalf of the company and you need to get reimbursed, I would assume you have to have receipts, right, to get reimbursed. That's not so in the legislature. They just put in for whatever, up to the limit, and they get it. No questions asked. There's no receipts required. So I don't get that. Pete Lopez doesn't get that. Dee Dee Barrett doesn't get it. I don't think Dee Dee does because I think Dee Dee is here, I know she represents here, but if you're inside of a 50-mile ring, you don't get a dime, which is great because I'm never going to get accused of abusing a per diem system. I've never filed an expense report. But anybody outside of the 50 miles gets per diem every day, and we've seen over and over and over again indictments, arrests. So there's a bill that I've sponsored, as many of us have, to try to cut down on corruption. So there's all kinds of stuff that you try to get through. But it's difficult to get anything through quickly. Nothing really happens fast, even if it's the best idea in the world. CPR in schools, for example, that's I think a stellar idea. It's taken quite a long time to get that bill through. So there's any number of things that I've sponsored. So I focus a lot on pro-business stuff, anti-corruption stuff, and really heavily on education as well.
You mentioned before that since you're a part of the minority party, you often have to give up legislation in order to get it passed. What are some of the other difficulties that you've run into being a part of the minority party in the assembly?
Not a lot. I mean, you don't get the same staffing allotment. So you don't get the same staffing allotment. Not a big deal. I think we should, because we represent the exact same number of New Yorkers. As a matter of fact, most of the minority districts are bigger than the majority districts are, so they'll stretch them to the limit on purpose. That's fine, but we all represent technically the same amount of New Yorkers. We should have the same sort of staff allotment, but that's really inside baseball stuff that the public really could care less about. They just want us to get our job done. But is it fair that Vito Lopez, who gets thrown out for sexual harassment, has a $440,000 staff allotment? Steve McLaughlin has $88,000. How is that in any way, shape, or form fair? I don't need $400,000, that's for sure, but neither does any other assemblyman out there. So there should be an equal rationing of resources. It's a minor difficulty. It's not something that I really care too much about. As far as getting bills through, there are those that would say, oh, you should vote for me, I'm in the majority. It does not matter. Nothing gets to that floor, no matter whether it's a majority bill, minority bill, it does not matter unless it gets through Sheldon Silver. And the majority members would tell you the same thing, that it's exceptionally difficult to get their bills to the floor and get them passed. So I don't view that as a particular impediment. I don't need to necessarily have my name as the headliner on a bill. Who cares? If it's a good bill and it gets through and I knew I got it through, fine, that's great. So there's not a lot of headaches, really, I don't think, with being in the minority. In some ways, it's more liberating, I think, because you're certainly able to say what needs to be said without worrying about Sheldon Silver clipping your wings and withholding your stipend or withholding your allotment, things like that, which happens frequently.
So, are there any specific legislation that you could tell me about that that you had to drop your name in order to get it passed?
No, I'd rather not, only
Okay.
because I don't want to do that to the person who passed the bill. So,
Okay.
but, there's been probably 4 or 5 of them that's happened with, but it's not fair to the person that ultimately passed the bill. So I'd rather not call them out and say, well,
Okay.
it was really my bill. But I mean, you go back to the John Faso days, he'd tell you the same thing. You just a lot of times you write the bill and it's a good bill, and you just end up saying, hey, you want to sponsor this, and I'll be co-sponsor on it. Fine, that's fine. At the end of the day, I don't think the public realizes or knows too much anyway, who is the prime sponsor or who's a multi-sponsor. I don't think the public cares. What they want to see is decent legislation getting passed. But some of the difficulties, there was one thing that comes to mind, just to step back for a second, you talk about difficulties. Some of our anti-corruption bills are not moving because we wrote them, and certainly no majority member is going to take those and push those, because that would really tick off Silver. And I'm not saying that on the Republican side in the Senate that they would take those and push them either, because it might tick off Skelos. But that is a frustration, I guess, because there's some good legislation that we have out there that would do a good job of trying to cut back on as much corruption as we can, and you don't see those. They don't get the light of day. For instance, forfeiting a pension if you commit a felony. I think that's kind of a no-brainer. The people of New York shouldn't have to pay you in perpetuity to be a criminal. But we can't get that through. So things like that. My bill for receipts required for expense reports. To me, that is absolute standard accounting practices. They don't want to even take it up. So things like that can get frustrated. However, even a majority member, if they sponsored that bill would not get to see the floor. But that's where the public comes in. And if the public keeps demanding things, that's how it happens. I always say Albany responds mostly to noise, is what Albany pays attention to.
So, can you tell me why you're the better candidate to represent the 107th District over your challenger?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think my challenger, and I know my challenger, I know Phil. He's a fine person. I don't have any gripe against Phil. But, I mean, I think you can look to the record. You can look to my experience over 4 years. You can look at the fact that there is not a louder voice for his constituents out there than me. I think the people know with me they're going to get the absolute truth. I don't sugarcoat things. I always say I don't suffer fools gladly or at all, really. So I'm not in there. My overwhelming goal in there is not to make friends inside that building. I don't work for anybody in that building. I work for the people out here. And I think I've put forth enough. I've been vocal enough on issues that people know where I stand. I've been the loudest voice against corruption in Albany, because if you have a corrupt government, and we are known as the most corrupt government in the United States, you can't have a very good functioning government if there's this much corruption running through it. So that's a push for me. My pro-business stance is what's going to help this economy get moving again. I've been very strong on education issues. I am opposed to the Common Core. That's part of who I am, not to knock my opponent, but there are some issues there. I mean, just if you go to Albany as a member of that majority, you are going to answer to Sheldon Silver, and you are going to pretty much march lockstep with Sheldon Silver, or you're not going to get anything. I don't need to do that as a member of the minority. He would. He would be. So he said he supports a progressive agenda. I do not. I think that's the wrong agenda for New York. I think that's why New York is declining, not rising. Is the more progressive we get, the more downhill this state goes. So he said that. And just knowing that the way Albany works, as I do, you go to Albany as a member of the majority, you're basically told, sit down, shut up, and do what you're told. That isn't the case for me. So those are some of the reasons. There's some issues you could talk about with my opponent that, listen, he's the one that had his notary seized by the state of New York, not me. He's the one that was witnessing or notarizing signatures that he didn't see, not me. He's the one that was charged that they said it was constituted gross misconduct. That's the letter from the Secretary of State. So there's some issues there. He voted against holding an open ethics forum for the townspeople to be, open and be able to see what was going on, not me. I didn't vote for a 22% raise for town employees, some of which happened to be my family members. He did. So there's some issues there. But overwhelmingly, I just think that, I'm the right person for the job just because of who I am and the vocal stances that I take out there on behalf of my constituents. They know that I've got their back.
I heard you in some press releases. You did criticize Phil for failing to file ethics forms, and I believe there was another one for reporting his campaign activities. I didn't hear about the notarizing though. Can you tell me about that?
There was a story a couple years ago in the Times-Union that we haven't really said too much about it because quite honestly we don't feel like we need to at this point. But it's a story out there a few years ago. We have the letter from Secretary of State. Andrew Cuomo's name is on that letterhead as well. And, the letter says right there, it's out there. It says that, what you did constitutes gross misconduct, threatening a state investigator who came out to take a look at what was going on. So that's an issue. That was a Times-Union story of, I'm going to say 3 years ago, something like that. I did criticize him for not filing his campaign finance reports or his ethics forms. Those are not optional. That's the law. And if you can't file forms that are required by law as a candidate, then why would the people of your district expect you to be able to handle the duties of the job, which only become more complex and busy once you get elected? If you can't even handle what you need to do as a candidate, I think they would rightly have questions about how you're going to handle constituent casework going forward. So that was that was 3 weeks late, and I will contend that the only reason it got filed at all is because I called them out, and then magically it got filed. And of course it was, it's not a big deal. It is a big deal. I mean, I hand walk those over. I make sure that they're on time. I get a stamped postcard that says they're on time, so that there's never going to be any question that my filings were done on time. To not do them on time is not only unacceptable, it's illegal.
So part of, very interestingly, in the campaign that you both have run, he was campaigning to get the line on the Independence Party on the ballot, and he got the endorsement, but you led a write-in campaign and ended up getting that line. Can you tell me about your campaign to do that and what your side sort of did?
Yeah, well, that was really, that's an important part of this campaign. Just to give you a little backstory, why I didn't get the independence line, I don't know. I'm probably the most independent guy in that building, so to not get the independence line was a bit of a shock. We had gone out and collected more than enough signatures to get the Wilson Pakula to run on the independence line, and turned them in, fully expecting we'd get the independence line, and then, of course, at the last second, we didn't get it. For whatever reason. To be honest, I'm still not 100% sure of what went on there. But I do know this. I don't shy away from a fight. So I said, well, that's not going to stand. We're taking this line. So we went back out, and we got all new signatures all over again in a hurry, in a very compressed time frame. We had about 2 weeks to get them. And we got enough to an OTB, opportunity to ballot. And then we just hit the streets, and we started walking like we always do. Talking to voters. I certainly have some grassroots support out there, and they were engaged and as angry as I was. And, whether it was my lack or my adversarial relationship with this governor, or whether it came from the Independence Party heads, I do not know. But I do know that I was going to win that line, and win it we did. And we're only the second time in New York State that anybody's won a write-in. Last time was 2 years ago with David Byrne and Dee Dee Barrett. And David won it by 20 votes or so, and it came down to absentees. We won by a close to 2-1 margin. So it was pretty resounding, definitive victory. And I don't want to say historic, I don't like to use those terms, but it was kind of unprecedented to pull off what we did. And I think it sent a strong message of the amount of support that I have out there. And the way we did it was just grassroots, just getting out there and talking to people, knocking on door after door after door. And just telling them, they mostly know who I am at this point anyway, but it was really just knocking on those doors, doing some advertising, some mailings, things like that. We didn't go up on the airwaves at all with that, but it was a lot of grassroots door-to-door. And got it done. I mean, I felt very good going into that primary day, but you just never know. With the write-in, it's very tough. We were literally calling people that day, and one guy's like, "Oh, I'm so glad you called. I'm in the ballot box, and your name's not here." I said, "Don't you remember us telling you like 6 times you have to write it in?" Mm-hmm. So it's still as easy it is now to do. It says write in. There's a finger pointing right to it. people still get in and get intimidated. So to get that many votes, was terrific. So we're very happy with the result. Like I said, I think it sent a clear signal, clear message, and I would assume that it had to be a bit of a blow to my opponent to realize that I wasn't on the ballot and beat you 2-1. Now I'm on the ballot on 4 different lines.
Wow. That was certainly something that I don't think anyone really expected.
No, and I don't want to say we expected it. We just felt very good going into it that, hey, we did all the work we could do. We didn't leave anything undone. Did a lot of work. And we sort of thought, well, something like this could come down to absentees, because usually in a write-in, if you have any shot at all, it's really, really tight. It wasn't tight at all. We ended up just dominating that night, which was great. It was good to see.
Shifting gears for a moment here, before you talked about working to help build the economy in New York.
Yeah.
Could you tell me what you've done to help increase the economic growth in the district?
Yeah, well, that's a difficult answer for any individual legislator. What do you do? I mean, you don't have the ability by yourself to cut regulations and taxes and fees and fines. So what you do mostly as a legislature is you're advocating those positions, and that's the macro level, is you're advocating on the floor. This is why what we're doing is not working. I'll give you a quick example of that. I advocated against Startup New York. I don't think it's the right way to go. I will be proven right on that, and I think I'm being proven right daily on that. Startup New York will not work because you can't have an economy where the government selects winners and losers. You get on this street right here, and all of these hardworking people aren't getting a dime of tax relief from Startup New York. They continue to pay their taxes, their employees pay their income taxes, but if somebody moves into RPI up by me in Troy in an incubator situation, they can go 10 years without paying a dime in income taxes or state taxes. That is fundamentally unfair and will not work, and it's part of the reason why people continue to leave New York. So I advocate against things like that don't make sense, and advocate for things that will streamline paperwork, fees, fines. That's the macro level. On the micro level, it is about getting in there to a business saying, how is the government in your way? What can we do to help you? What can we do to get them out of the way to make your life better? And sometimes there are things we can do. Sometimes we'll find out about a situation that's, quite frankly, maybe going on for a while. And there are times we can get involved and say, this is what we're going to do to get the government out of your way, or to kind of smooth things over, fix things. We've had things where tax issues have been a problem, and you kind of can work with the tax department to say, can we set up a payment plan so we don't crush this guy? He's got the ability to get through it, but we just need to structure this properly so the guy can get through it. And quite honestly, the state generally is pretty good. I mean, everybody kind of rails against state agencies, but from my perspective, they've been really good. I mean, Liquor Authority's been great. The tax department's been very good when they can. I mean, there are certain times they say we can't do it. We've given them 5 extensions, and I get that. But when they can, they've been very good about trying to help. So I give them more credit, I think, than most. DOT, there are times where I'm saying, I've got to get this stretch of road paved because it's killing this guy's business. Nobody can get in and out of his business. There are times, we had a place in New Lebanon, a bakery that was trying to open up, and the building had been there forever and ever. She tries to open up, bringing a business into New Lebanon, which could use all the help it can get, of course, as we continue to advocate for grocery stores over there, or a grocery store. And they're giving her grief about curb cuts. Who cares about the curb cuts? I mean, the building's been there for 50 years. Everybody can get in and out of that building fine. But those are the times where you have to sort of weigh in a little bit and say, come on, she's trying to bring a business in. You're worried about a stupid curb. It's idiotic. So there are times where we can get them to back off and help, which is good. So that's sort of the micro level of what we can do.
Can you tell me about, specifically for agriculture, what you've done to help boost the situation for farmers in the county?
Yeah, it's certainly been very supportive of, and I give the governor credit for this one. We've done a good job on making New York more friendly to our farmers. We still have a long way to go. The CAFO, the herd size restrictions that we've backed off on, allowing some of these somewhat smaller farmers to be able to grow their herd without having to deal with the really onerous regulations. We've had some success there. We've had some success with net metering of energy. That continues to go, and that's something that I do pay attention to quite often because I'm in the solar business myself. So we've had some success there. We've had some success with the farm to market initiatives, cider, beer, yogurt, those type of things that I have been supportive of. But quite honestly, those are those issues that you really don't see a lot of pushback. That's stuff that really tends to happen in a bipartisan way, and even a lot of the city legislators get it. They don't quite understand, and we take them to a farm once a year or so. They don't quite get that you're supposed to wear work boots, not high heels, but they're getting there. They kind of. I still think they think the milk just shows up at the farmers market in Manhattan. So we've done that. We've advocated. We've brought them to farms. We've shown them around. It does open their eyes a little bit about what's really going on at a farm, and that's something that the farmers need and want, is because they're the ones that are dealing with some pretty tough restrictions a lot of times. And farmers are stewards of the land and do a really great job of it. I don't know any farmer that goes out there and tries to abuse the land or his livestock or anything else. But they will tell you that there are certain things we've got to do that we have to back off on to make these farms grow and be more successful without harming the environment, without harming people. There are things that we can do and have done to try to kind of push that along. Still have a ways to go, though, but we're getting there. I think New York's done the past couple of years a better job of helping our farmers.
Excellent. You mentioned before that you're against the Common Core.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain your stance a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that the Common Core is at all the appropriate way to go. So much so that I'm on the Stop Common Core line in a few weeks. That's one of the 4 lines that I have. And around here, I think it'll just be myself and Rob Astorino. So on top of running that independence primary, we went out and got Stop Common Core signatures as well. I think that ultimately it boils down to this. Kids are not common. You cannot teach kids like they're cookie cutter. And the pushback I get all the time is, well, Steve, don't you believe in higher standards? Of course I do. But just because you say this is higher standards doesn't necessarily mean that it is. And you're seeing, when I go into a school and a superintendent is telling me that kids are stressed out, they're crying, they're literally falling down on the floor crying, some of them are losing bladder control, they're that stressed out. What are we doing to our children that this is the way we're now going to teach them? I've looked at the math. It doesn't make any sense. There's inappropriate curriculum in there. And I just feel that we will get down the road here, and I'm not willing to waste a decade of our children finding this out. We will get a decade down the road, and this will be just like Race to the Top and just like No Child Left Behind, which got jettisoned. This was the shiny new toy in education. It will not work because ultimately kids are not common. The way to fix education is let teachers be teachers. Let them teach. Because every teacher I know, my wife included, generally has a really good feel for their kids in that classroom. Especially by this point in the year. I mean, they've had those kids since September. Within a week or two, if they're a good teacher, they understand what their kids need. And what Johnny needs is not what Sally needs. And you can't teach them in a cookie-cutter way. And that's ultimately what this is. It doesn't produce creative thinking. It produces a nation of test takers. And I'm vehemently opposed to it. And what I'm hopeful for is that parents continue to do what many of them are doing and opt their children out of these standardized tests. Ultimately, this is untested. It's unproven. And I don't know why you would subject the children of this state to an untested, unproven change in their education system. And if we were going to do this, and I don't agree that we should have, but if we were going to do it, the way to roll this out was over time, not all at once, but in absolute typical Andrew Cuomo fashion. And I can show you the letter that he wrote to Merrill Tisch demanding that this stuff get done. And in fact saying he's going to reward schools that move quickly and punish those that don't move quickly. What does that get? I flew airplanes for a living. When an emergency happens, you don't move quickly. You actually move kind of slow and analytical and figure out what's going on. That's not the way he does business. As a result, we did this in the dead of night. We passed APPR, the teacher evaluation system. All this stuff got done at light speed without forethought of what the consequences would be. And what we said to schools were, if you don't do this, you're not going to get your aid, which was illegal anyway. That was never going to happen. But that was the threat that was made. So what should have occurred if we're going to make a wholesale change to our education system is roll it out slowly. Maybe you do K1, 2. And, within 2 weeks, they're 4th, 5th graders. I mean, my kids are graduating. One's graduating, one's a senior. That goes by so quick that I would have rolled this out in a slower, more methodical manner. Don't come into an 8th grader and suddenly change direction midstream, or 10th grader and 11th grader. It's just not fair, and the results are what they are. Now what do we see? Now we see the regions dumbing down the test yet again, saying, well, you don't need as many correct answers to pass. Well, what a great way to make your test scores look better when I need less correct answers. It's the wrong way to go, and I think, in fact, that's one I know I'll be proven right on sooner rather than later.
So can you, shifting a little bit, my next question was going to be about how the state can better serve both students and teachers, but I think you pretty much answered that last one. Can you explain your stance on the SAFE Act?
I can, but let me just take one step just back on that for 1 sec. How can we better serve? One of the things that I continue to advocate for and have since I've arrived is that we ought to really be focused a little more on some technical education for these kids. I just left a credit union breakfast. We should be talking about financial and fiscal literacy as part of the curriculum in high school. That's one small thing. But we really ought to not be focused exclusively on STEM. Right now, if you're not STEM, you're getting left behind. And one quick side note on that with Common Core, the special needs kids are absolutely getting thrown under the proverbial bus with this Common Core. They're supposed to take the exact same test as a quote-unquote, normal performing child. It's child abuse to put a kid that's autistic or Down syndrome or something through the exact same test that his peers are taking. It makes no sense. The other thing, the way to serve our students and teachers better, let the teachers teach, that's number one. But other thing is we really should be talking a little bit more about technical education. There's a lot of kids out there that should not be going to college, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But every president we've had for a long time, Republican and Democrat, continues to talk about college education. It's great. I went to college, probably everybody in this room did. But that was our path in life. There are kids that are geniuses if you put them on a backhoe. They just instinctively know what to do if you put a hammer in their hand. And they're going to be happy and fulfilled and, quite frankly, make more money than me as an assemblyman. If you become a plumber or an electrician or a carpenter, you're going to do quite well. But I think we've devalued blue-collar labor. We're sending far too many kids down a path of debt and lack of jobs that they'll never be able to recover from, and they're not really going to be happy and fulfilled. So that's one area I think we could do a lot better job in is kind of encouraging these technical educations. When I went to high school, I went to a private high school, so we did not have it where I went. But when I was in junior high in public school, we had shop. You learned different things. You had electricity, you had carpentry. We're lucky we get out of there with our fingers intact, but be that as it may, we had shop class. That kind of opened the door for some of these kids who are now home builders over in Massachusetts making $1 million a year. I think pigeonholing everybody into this, not only is it now not only just college, now it's got to be STEM. Everything's STEM, STEM, STEM. And if you're not that, we're going to leave you behind, basically seems to be the message. It's the wrong message. Anyway, and you wanted to know about my stance on the SAFE Act.
Yes.
Well, I think probably everybody in the district knows my stance on the SAFE Act. If there's probably anything that, I don't want to say put me on the map, but in a way it did. I've been the most vocal opponent of the SAFE Act because it is, without a doubt, the most poorly written law I have ever laid eyes on in my time in Albany. And when you spend time in Albany, trust me, that's saying something. It is a badly written law, executed even worse. It does nothing to make New Yorkers safe. Nothing. I would say it puts us in a little more danger because, as usual, criminals will not obey the law. You've seen an increase in shootings in New York City post-SAFE Act. Some would say post-stop and frisk as well, but nonetheless, shootings have gone up in some of our cities. So I'd love somebody to explain to me how the SAFE Act is making us safer. The criminals will ignore it like they always do. It was completely arbitrary, so poorly written that when it was first rolled out, the police, if they were responding to an incident at Ichabod Crane and entered school grounds wearing their service weapon, would have been in violation of the SAFE Act. That's how idiotic this bill was. If a helicopter flew over and dropped the gun into the school and the cop caught it, he'd be okay. But if he walked on the school grounds, even as a police officer, he was in violation of the law. Idiotic. The Veterans Administration has flat out said they will not comply with the mental health aspects of this bill. They will not comply. Not that they're thinking about not complying. They have said we are not complying with the bill. It is a terribly badly written piece of legislation. It is a ultimate knee-jerk reaction by Andrew Cuomo trying to be a big shot in the wake of Sandy Hook. It does not make New Yorkers safer, and if you look at the videos of me on the floor, what I'm espousing and what I'm talking about has all come to pass. I said that day that we passed it, the manufacturers will not make 7-round magazines. And the answer was, we're in New York. That's the arrogance out of New York City. We're in New York, they'll do it for us. The manufacturer said, guess what? We're not doing it. So what happened? They had to backtrack and say, well, yeah, you can now have 10 rounds again. So, and it was a completely arbitrary number. I mean, there were those on the floor that advocated for 1 round, lock the door and call the cops, 1 round. And when I point out situations like I did on the floor of a mom home with her twins in Georgia in a beautiful home, probably around here, probably a $400,000 colonial, and a guy's breaking into her home, and coming through her front door, she's retreating in her home with her twins into her bedroom. He comes through that door. She's retreating all the way to the crawl space. She had a .38, not much of a firearm. That's what the cops used to carry, but she had a .38. She is on the phone with her husband. Her husband's on another line with 911. You can hear all of it transpire. She shot that guy. She had 6 rounds. She only had 5 loaded. Hit him all 5 times. That's 1 guy. Didn't kill him. That's her home that this guy broke into. The SAFE Act would have limited her ability, right? Potentially, to have the firearm that she deemed necessary. So the way that guy was caught, by the way, was not because he died, unfortunately. He stumbled out of the house, drove down, and crashed into a pole. And then the police showed up. But as usual, the police were about 12 minutes away. So you go up, we're rural. I mean, not right here, but you go up, we have some very rural areas in Columbia County and in Rensselaer County, and I go all the way up into Washington County. You may have 2 troopers on duty at night. If some crackhead breaks into some single mom's house, I am not letting Andrew Cuomo prevent my constituents from protecting themselves and their family. And the bill does absolutely nothing to make New York safer. It puts us in more jeopardy. So as you can tell, I'm a little passionate about it. It is a bad, bad piece of legislation. So much so that 23 attorneys generals from other states have joined the lawsuit against Andrew Cuomo. 23. That's not just people that are saying a little bit irritated. You see the signs out there. You see the anti-SAFE Act signs. How many counties? 51 or 52 counties have officially opposed this act. So this isn't just Steve McLaughlin saying, I don't like this bill. This is a very bad piece of legislation, all done to promote Andrew Cuomo. But the net result of that is it's ended his chance to run for the president. So if there's any upside to the SAFE Act, that's it.
Wow. So do you think that, as opposed to the SAFE Act, do you think that there should be something similar to it that maybe doesn't go to the extent that it does, or do you think that
I really
we're
don't.
okay with
I really don't. New York had some of the most restrictive gun legislation in the land. Maryland, for example, prides themselves on having the strictest gun laws in the nation. They're like number 1 in one category, number 4 in the other, and not in a good way. So, yet Vermont, where if you can fog a mirror, you can get a firearm, if you're a law-abiding citizen, basically, they're not shooting each other over there. So everybody kind of acts like, well, we had to do something. We already had really, really restrictive laws. And ultimately what we did with the SAFE Act as far as what are deemed assault weapons, they are not assault weapons. They're just called assault weapons because it's a convenient political term to demonize them. They're not assault weapons. They're semi-automatic weapons, just like 90 to 95% of all firearms sold are semi-automatic. They look scary, I grant you that, but if I had 7 of them lined up here and I showed you the iteration of each one, this one wouldn't bother anybody generally because it looks just like a hunting rifle. It looks like a .22. Nothing. Just a wooden stock. But when you start adding all the stuff, it looks really kind of bad. kind of scary by you get to the end of the table. Those are mostly cosmetic features. So we banned a scary package. But if I strip all that away, the bullet comes out at the exact same rate of speed. It's the same bullet. It's everything else. The other point would be, there's a great video out there from Jesse Duff, who's a world-class marksman. He looks like Shania Twain, She can shoot anything. And she went through 6 of these things. She said, this is what everybody's afraid of. It's 223. Little small hole. It's not coming out rapid fire. It is not an automatic weapon. There's all kinds of misconceptions about that. You pull the trigger, a bullet comes out. Same thing. But if you take a shotgun with a slug in it, it'll make a hole this big. Take a 9mm. It makes a hole this big. The 9mm handgun is way more powerful than an AR-15. So ultimately, what happens here is we have really restrictive laws in New York and in Chicago and in most big cities, most states. Pretty restrictive laws. But the problem is many people, for whatever political reasons there may be, choose not to really hammer people. What we could have done and should have done, because I grant you, we needed to have a conversation right after Sandy Hook. There should have been a mature conversation where you bring everybody in. That's not what Andrew Cuomo did. Andrew Cuomo jammed this thing through in the middle of the night. No public input, no meetings. Even Connecticut, where the tragedy took place, had public meetings and public hearings for months and months and months. Andrew Cuomo had to be the big shot and do it right away. What we could have done, I think, certainly could have had a conversation about what can we do? What do you think would work for both sides? There are certain people that are going to say, no matter what, if you're anti-gun, I'm not voting for it. And then there are other people say, no matter what, if it's pro-gun, I want it. So you can't really satisfy everybody. But what we should have done is said, listen, you commit a crime with a handgun or a firearm, you're gone for a really long time. Start increasing the minimum sentences. If you commit a crime using a firearm, we should be tacking on 5 to 10 to 15 years, mandatory. Guess what? We already have those statutes. But there are certain sides, ideologically, that don't want to enforce them. That's the problem in Chicago. Really restrictive gun laws that don't get enforced. That's the problem. So it isn't the law-abiding guy. It isn't anybody in this room that's ever going to cause a problem. I mean, there's plenty of times where I'm in rooms where everybody's armed and nobody's causing any problems because they're law-abiding citizens. It's the criminal, it's the bad guy, it's the community gun, it's the drug addict, and they aren't ever going to use an AR-15. That's not what they do. It's all illegal handguns. That's the problem. So we could have and should have had a conversation about it. New Yorkers weren't given the respect by this governor or this legislature, by the way, and I hold the Senate responsible for not even debating the bill. The Assembly, we had a 5-hour debate. They debated the state snack being yogurt for an hour, didn't debate the SAFE Act for 1 minute. So I don't know how, as a legislator, you don't debate something of this magnitude. I just don't understand. It's not acceptable. And that's me calling out my own party on the Republican side. But it's not acceptable. You cannot pass a bill like that onto the people of New York without at least debating it. So I think we could have had a conversation and probably come to some kind of agreement, and probably neither side would have been happy, which is usually a sign of a halfway decent agreement, that both sides are a little bit unhappy with it. But I think we could have done something. That doesn't mean that we didn't already have really restrictive laws, because what we now call high capacity here in New York of 10 rounds, well, heck, in Colorado or some other states are saying, well, 15 rounds is high capacity. So it just shows you the arbitrary nature of the whole argument.
So to what extent do you think firearm and ammunition sales should be limited? Do you think there should be an extent?
Well, I mean, what do you mean? Can you elaborate on that for me? Limited as far as what? How many you can own?
How many you can own? What kind you can own? How long it takes for you to get it?
Yep.
What sort of, if you've committed a crime, if you've been had some sort of mental illness, like those sorts of details.
Yeah, that's very. Some aspects of that are very difficult. The mental illness side, for example. So let's start from the beginning there. What can you own? Well, we already have big-time restrictions on what you can own, and some of those are nationwide. You can't own a machine gun unless you're a federal firearms dealer, unless you have really special permitting. Fine, you can't own that. Automatic weapons, same thing. You can't own those unless you're very specific people can have those. But when you get into the semi-automatic range, they're again, it comes down to law-abiding citizen. I personally have not had a big problem with background checks because you got to go through background checks on lots of things to get employed, to do all kinds of things. But once you prove, I'm not a danger to society, I'm not a problem, do you really care whether I have 5 shotguns or 1? Maybe I need 5 shotguns because I hunt deer, I hunt squirrel, I hunt, different things that you need different firearms for. And I know lots of guys like that, that hunt different animals. Or they target you. There's guys I know out there that have 10,000 rounds of ammo in their garage. 10,000. All the time. Why? Well, because they might shoot 1,000 rounds a week at targets. I mean, that's their hobby. I play golf a lot. They shoot a lot. They'll go, that's how they blow off steam. They're shooting at a target, at a range. Are they ever going to cause anybody a problem? No. Should they have to wait and get a background check every single time they try to buy ammunition? I don't think so. I mean, they're law-abiding citizens. They've proven that. It'd be like if you wanted to fly to Florida and every single time you had to go through a background check and wait an hour and a half. You'd get a little irritated with that because you're saying, I'm not the bad guy here. I'm not the problem. So I don't have a real problem with ammo. I think the background checks on ammunition are ridiculous because, again, once you've proven you're a law-abiding citizen and you haven't broken the law, you should be okay. Mental illness is really, really difficult because I don't want a gun in the hands of somebody that is mentally ill. The flip side of that, and it's a tough issue because this is why the VA said they won't comply. We don't want to drive people underground. We don't want people that are, maybe they're a little depressed, but they're not suicidal. They're not going to hurt anybody, but they're not feeling quite right. You want them to seek the help that they need. But ultimately what this law forces is it forces them to go underground because you're painting a scarlet letter on them, seizing all their firearms. You don't want that. So you have a very slippery slope here that I can't tell you that I have the exact answer on that. I don't know that anybody does. I just know that if I go to the doctor and say, Doc, I'm not feeling quite right. I lost my job. I'm kind of bummed out, but I'm not suicidal. I'm kind of down in the dumps. Does that mean you're mentally ill and you shouldn't be able to go deer hunting? I don't know. I'm not a mental health expert. I think for most people, they're going to recover and they're going to be fine. So it's a tough issue. Somebody that is, obviously got severe mental problems, there's no way they should have firearms. And we already had all that in place way before the SAFE Act. It's not like the SAFE Act did any of that. Post-SAFE Act, just so you know, there was a librarian out in Buffalo that had all of his firearms seized. The guy's totally healthy. But about 5 years ago, he needed oral surgery, and he was really freaked out about a root canal, so the doctor gave him a Xanax. Next thing you know, the guy's getting his gun seized. Now, how is that appropriate in any way? But that's the danger we can get into here. So it's a tough, the mental health issue thing is really, really difficult. And I can't tell you that I have the answer or anybody else has the definitive answer. But as far as what I own or what I don't own, again, if I'm a law-abiding citizen, it really doesn't matter what I own. If that happened to be an AR-15 or a 9mm or a Glock, what's the difference? I'm not going to hurt anybody. I think that many people think the very presence of the firearm turns people into homicidal maniacs, and it's just not the case. So...
Well, thank you. I won't ask you any more SAFE Act questions.
All right. I can go all day on that, man.
I know. Oh, man. We'll shift gears a little bit.
Yeah.
Can you tell me your stance on raising the minimum wage?
Yeah, tough one. I mean, that's one you try to... I think right now New York is tied to the federal minimum wage, and if that goes up, ours goes up automatically, and that's appropriate. Again, a bit of a slippery slope, and I've heard both sides of the argument there. And quite frankly, both sides have some merit where you can say, well, you have to make, whatever, $12, $13, whatever the minimum wage is. And then I've had business owners that say, if you do it, I'm not hiring these high school kids. I'm not. I might hire them for 20 hours a week, but they're not going to get 30. Or I'll just work more myself because what am I going to do? Charge $16 for a pizza? I'm going to lose all my business. So there is that side of the coin as well. I advocated for a training wage for those that are less than 18. because they are learning skills. They are learning. My kids, let's use my kids as an example. They are learning. They're learning to show up on time. They're there on time, trust me. But, they're kids. They're teenagers. They're learning that responsibility of getting up, getting to work, doing your job. Are they magically, at the stroke of a pen, worth $13 because the government said so? I don't think so. I really don't. And what do you do then with the person that has been there 2 or 3 years and has worked their way up to $13 an hour, let's say, from 9 or 10 or whatever, because they've done the job, they've performed? What do you do with them? Well, suddenly they're going to say, wait a minute, now I've been here 3 years and now I'm making minimum wage. Forget that. I want 16 or 17 bucks an hour. So there is a pressure point that comes up as well, where you can spur inflation, you can do all kinds of things. Nothing economically happens in a vacuum. There's always going to be something happening. If you push on this, something else is going to happen. So I think tying it to the federal minimum wage works. We already raised the minimum wage in New York, and before it even took effect, they're coming back for more, saying we got to raise it again. We got to raise it again. Ultimately, at the end of the day, does it make a gigantic difference in the grand scheme of things? I don't think so. I think that I think you could probably safely, raise the minimum wage over time, as long as we step it up over time. Jumping it, like some people want to do from 9 to 12, you can really put a hurt on some businesses that are already really hurting. What are they going to do? They're going to pass that on to the customers. So then the customers, paying more money for this goods or services anyway. In the grand scheme of things, does it make that much difference? I don't know. I'm not an economic expert, so I'm sort of agnostic on it. We raised it already. If it follows the minimum wage, I think that's what we should do. If it follows the federal minimum wage, I think that's what we should do.
Do you think the federal minimum wage is fair? I know it's being bumped up at the end of this year to, I believe, $8.75 an hour.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Is it fair? That's in the eye of the beholder. Ultimately, I'd say no, because obviously we all make more. I hope we all make more than that, but some days it feels like I don't. But is that fair? No, not necessarily. But what's fair? What's fair in Idaho versus New York City? Vastly different standards of living and expenses. I get all that. I also understand that very, very few people spend their lives on minimum wage, which is sort of how the argument is presented, that somebody's going to be a minimum wage worker their whole life. Boy, if that's the case, you have other issues than what the minimum wage is. I don't know anybody that spends their entire career making minimum wage, or at least they shouldn't. So there's other issues to deal with there. But is it fair? I guess you could say no, it's not fair, but then who gets to decide what is now fair? Which is why I think you got to tie it to inflation. Wherever it is, and it should mirror inflation. Conversely, when inflation drops, which we have really low inflation right now, the minimum wage doesn't get cut, nor am I saying that it should. I'm just saying it doesn't. If inflation's really low, minimum wage can still potentially go up. So, and I'm not saying we should cut it if inflation drops. It's a tough issue, it's a tough one. And I feel for people. I mean, when I got out and started flying airplanes for a living, I don't even think I was making minimum wage, quite honestly, if I really divided out all the hours. So what did I do? I got another job. I cut lawns. I made my student loan payments cutting lawns. And I made more money cutting lawns than I did flying airplanes. But I was working my way up. I was learning my skills. I was getting there. And then eventually, I made more money. So I feel for people, but I don't think at the stroke of a pen you can magically just say, suddenly we've gone from 9 to 12. I think you have to measure it out over time.
Could you tell me your stance on, we recently had the big Supreme Court Hobby Lobby ruling. Could you tell me your stance on employers disagreeing with their employees' reproductive health decisions? Do you think employers should be able to take action against employees based on their reproductive health decisions?
No, and I don't think that's what the Hobby Lobby case did either. The Hobby Lobby case just said, you do whatever you want, but we shouldn't have to be forced to pay for it. I think that's ultimately what the Hobby Lobby decision was all about. But no, I don't think that an employer should be weighing in on somebody's, you said healthcare decisions?
Reproductive health decisions.
No, but nor do I think they necessarily have to pay for it. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you think it should be up to the employer if they choose whether or not they're able to cover certain reproductive health decisions?
Well, I'm trying to remember the details of the Hobby Lobby case. Was that they didn't want to pay for it? what did they not want to pay for?
They didn't want to pay for birth control. I believe that's what it was.
Yeah.
Well, there was a vote that I saw that went through the assembly that was.
It was a Hobby Lobby type of.
It was like that. It was the bill made it illegal for an employer to take action against an employee based on their reproductive health decisions.
Yeah, I don't think the employer should at all be taking action on an employer based on their reproductive health decisions. But that was an interesting case and kind of above my head as a Supreme Court type case. So, I mean, I think people make their own decisions, but apparently, from the way the ruling went down, that they don't have to necessarily pay for that either, right? So, I guess that's my position, that they should be able to make their own healthcare decisions. Obviously. I mean, that's my position.
Okay. Okay. Because I looked at the Assembly bill, and I was kind of hoping you could explain it to me because you voted against it.
I'm trying to remember the bill. It was a while ago.
I wrote down the number. I don't think that'll help you, though.
Not when you're voting on about 2,000 of them. I remember voting on that bill, but I can't remember every single detail at this point of what that bill was.
Okay.
That was a while ago.
It was in June 2014.
Yeah.
That was a few months ago.
But that's Fast and Furious time at the Assembly where you vote on hundreds and hundreds of bills rapid fire. So.
All right. Well, I got a couple more that I was hoping you could explain. So we'll see if.
All right. See if I can remember. There's a lot of bills.
What is your stance on legislation that would prohibit wage discrimination based on gender or nationality or race?
Yeah, I mean, obviously fully opposed to that. But that is not. Are you talking about the gender bill?
There was two bills that I have here. They were both had to do. One was wage discrimination based on gender, race, nationality, and the other one was prohibiting discrimination based on gender identity.
Yeah.
So the idea is paying someone differently based on their gender. I mean, we have the wage gap in this country, whereas women make 70-some cents.
Well, but there are reasons for that. It's not just that women exit and enter the workforce more frequently than men. That's part of the statistic that doesn't get told for sure. But no, it's not fair to. I mean, and I personally have never experienced it. When I was flying airplanes, if you were a female pilot and I was a male pilot, you get paid the same. You get paid on the equipment you flew and the number of years you were there. If you're a cop, you get paid number of years you're there, right? I mean, so I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm just saying in my professional experience, I haven't dealt with it. Claudia Tenney, who sits 2 seats to the left of me, Nicole Malliotakis, Dee Dee Barrett, they all make the same that I do. So, yeah, it's not fair to discriminate on based on that at all. Same thing with sexual identity. Now, if you're getting into the gender bill itself, that's a whole different animal for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So why did you vote against it?
Again, you'd have to look. I always say to people, you can't just look at the title of a bill. You have to get inside the guts of the bill, and there had to be something in there that didn't work for me. But that doesn't mean there are bills that I voted no on in the past that then I've changed because the bill has changed, and I said, you know what, I can vote yes now based on what's there. But there had to be something inside that bill that I was reading. I always tell people, don't look at just the title. There's always more to it than the title of the bill. Hence, things like the SAFE Act, which I don't think makes us safe. So you can't go off that. There had to be something else in there that was, I voted no on because of that.
Okay. Let's see.
And if it was the gender bill, I debate that bill every year. And that has to do with a guy like me, dressed like me, saying I self-identify as a woman and walking into the ladies' room or the locker room or the steam room or anything else. So if it's that bill, there's a specific reason why I voted for it. But I also advocate on the floor. I am not looking to discriminate against somebody that is a transsexual. They should not be discriminated against in housing or employment or anything else. But nor do I think it's fair to a little 10-year-old girl to be going into a ladies' room and have a guy dressed like me walk in because he's self-identified at that moment as a woman. That, to me, is outside the bounds of normal society. And it's why I vote no. So if it's one of those bills, that would have been the reason I voted no. I'm not saying it is, but there is a gender bill that we call the bathroom bill. And those are my specific objections to that bill. But I also continue to advocate on the floor, look, identify me what self-image means, and the sponsor never can. because self-image is clearly self-explanatory. It's how you view yourself. So if you view yourself as a woman at that moment, you can walk right into the ladies' locker room. I don't have daughters, but if I did, I wouldn't be real happy about some guy walking into the ladies' room or the locker room or the steam room with them. And by the way, if you go to stop that person, you get charged with a hate crime. So if it's that bill, those are the specific reasons why.
Okay.
But during that debate, I still say, look, that doesn't mean you discriminate them in housing. You can't tell somebody you can't live here because you're a transsexual. That's completely unfair.
Okay. I actually wasn't familiar with that one.
It may be one of those two, because we don't have a heck of a lot of those type of bills, so it possibly is one of those two.
Okay. I'll definitely have to look into that. We'll get to some local issues here. Have you ever heard any of your constituents mention anything about broadband availability in the area?
Absolutely, yeah.
Can you tell me about any of the strides you've made to help bring broadband to the area,
Sure.
or what efforts you would undertake to help?
It's funny you say that, because I stopped today in Valencia to have lunch at Magdalena's there. There's no cell service inside the building. So as soon as you get out, I was all right, but nothing inside. It's a real problem around here, and it gets progressively worse the further north you go. Get up into the Adirondacks or something and forget it, really. So that's something that I've partnered up quite a lot with Chris Gibson on. Chris is focused on that, as am I. And the governor mentioned it the other day. If we're truly going to spend this much money to roll broadband out, that's a good thing. So we continue to push for that. I've had instances, take the town of Nassau up in Rensselaer County. The town has cable, the village doesn't. I mean, how, right? So we try to lean on Verizon and the cable companies, knowing full well that you can't really force them to do it. It's like trying to run a gas line where I live. It stops about a mile from my house, and I can't get them to come out to my house because nobody will hook up. And that's their problem, is the cable companies and the broadband companies will tell you it costs money to hook up. If we don't have X amount of people guaranteed to do it, we're going to lose money. We're not in business to lose money. I get it. I understand that. But that may be an instance where a public-private partnership would work, where we're saying, look, this is going to open up a lot of avenues educationally, business-wise. People can work from home more. All that stuff is all good. So we continue to advocate for that. But it is not an easy, quick, get it done right away type thing, because there's definitely economic pushback from some of the companies that don't want to do it. It's like trying to put a grocery store in New Lebanon. To us, it's a no-brainer. To Price Chopper in Hannaford, they go, not enough traffic. So, but we continue to advocate and continue to push. So we're moving the ball along there. We'd love to be laying cable all over the place. We're putting in broadband all over the place right now, but it's a slow go. So we've held forums. We continue to do that every year. It's about building momentum on an issue like that. Conversely, part of the problem there is as upstate New York depopulates, it becomes increasingly economically difficult for the companies to make money doing that. So there's an issue there as well.
Excellent. So you mentioned before you work for Monolith Solar. Can you tell me about what kind of work you do for them?
Yeah, sales. So okay. I'm a sales rep for them, which is enjoyable. I mostly focus on commercial. Only because that's really about all I have time for, because this takes up more than full time. But I enjoy it. It's fun. It's green, which is great. People love it. It's a fun business to be in.
What role do you think renewable energy should play in the future for the state? Well,
a big role. But, and I'm in the solar business, so I'm a huge advocate, as is my opponent, by the way, in the solar business.
Yeah, he mentioned he worked for Monolith.
We used to work together. Yeah. But it's a supplement. You are not, in our lifetimes, going to power your economy on solar energy or wind. Wind is especially inefficient for a whole host of reasons, but it's a great supplement. But we have a long way to go to get there. I just saw something just last night where now they have clear solar panels, which is really cool, because if you can make your window be a solar panel. So we're getting there. It's really, as long as solar's been around, and Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the White House back in the 70s, it is still in its infancy, because it sort of started up and then died out, and now it's kind of coming back, and we're making strides. There will come a day where those windows are solar, and where your paint is nano paint when you're painting your house, and that's collecting energy. So it has a big role in the future, but we're not there yet. And to jump the gun on that is actually more harm than good at some point. So right now, solar is subsidized because it needs to be. Eventually, you won't need it, and we've already seen incentives be cut back from NYSERDA over the years. So because the industry is starting to gain its footing, still a lot of roofs out there that need solar panels, but it is a great supplement. You can't fly an airplane on solar panels. You can't drive a car yet on solar, but you can on natural gas. So the other side of that is probably the fracking question, which is, listen, there's hundreds of years of natural gas under our feet. It's a lot cleaner burning than oil and coal and safer than nuke. So we shouldn't be turning our back on that. So I'm really kind of an all of the above on energy. What I want is cheap energy because that's what makes our economy is dependent on cheap energy. And watch what happens now as the price at the pump right now is dropping, and we're all seeing that. It's I heard $3.12. I haven't seen that yet, but I've seen $3.20, $3.30. As that continues to drop, that does spur the economy on. That puts more money in people's pockets. Holidays are coming. That is an economic boost. So that's a direct result of what cheap energy can do. So I love it. It's great. It's a great supplement. You can't power the whole thing yet. Not yet. Maybe someday. Maybe our kids will be talking about that. But, not yet. We're getting there, though.
Let me know where you see 312. If you get a
I heard it. I heard it on the radio.
Let me know.
As a guy on the radio talking about, I'm like, 312, where's that? He said it's named, whatever it is, it's petrol. So it's one of those petrol stations, kind of off-brand. There's one in Bethlehem, I know that. But I don't know where he actually was, Rotterdam. But I'm like, 312.
I know this is different, but I was in Jersey this week and it was under 3.
Under 3. And they pump it down there. It's taxes and stuff up here that makes it so high, but
290s. I think it was actually 291 or something.
In Jersey, you can't even pump your own. They have attendants everywhere. But yeah, so we're getting there. But you'll see, that's more money in people's pockets as we hit the holidays. You should see hopefully an uptick in spending. Well, I'll be interested to see what retail sales look like. If not only gas but oil, for our heating our homes. It's if I'm spending $1,000 less this year, that's beautiful. I'm probably going to spend it on the kids or something else. So that's a good thing. But as far as renewables, they play a big role. I mean, the Nano College can hopefully make some great strides on certain products and industries. But right now, it's a supplement. So right now, it's in the R&D phase, overwhelming.
You mentioned fracking for a moment there. What is your stance on fracking?
Pro fracking. I'd frack my backyard if there was gas in it. Listen, there's 29 states that are doing it safely. If this was the danger that the anti-fracker Yoko Ono types say it was, trust me, it would be sprayed all over the New York Times front page. Barack Obama says it's safe. Barack Obama's EPA says it's safe because it is. It can be done. We are Americans. We can get gas out of the ground safely. And as a matter of fact, New York has over 5,000 fracked wells right now in New York State. We've been fracking for decades in the state. We frack vertically. There are those, and I agree with this, that will tell you that horizontal is safer because it's less wellheads. It's less that you need. The problems that we've had, because if I'm coming down and going out, that's a lot less wellheads that I need. The problem that we've had, and we've learned, like every other industry, is bad well casings. If you have a bad well casing, just like in your home, if you drill a hole for water and you have a bad well casing, you're going to get lousy water. You can fix all this stuff. We've had a very, very few instances where the well was not good, and in every instance it's been fixed and cleaned up within a couple of days because of wellhead casing. So they're triple, quadruple enclosed, cement and steel. This can be done safely, and to let the southern tier suffer the way it is beyond belief to me. I mean, that is a economic boom that really would benefit New York State all over the place. There's also a national security issue to natural gas. We literally have hundreds of years of gas under our feet. If you were burning your car and my car on natural gas instead of gasoline, it's cleaner burning, it's less carbon emissions, it's better for the air. All of that's a good thing. It's also a national security issue because we're dealing right now, ISIS is making millions of dollars a day off of oil wells that they control and own. How does that in any way benefit the United States of America? There's also an issue of, in inner cities like New York City, there's an asthma issue where a lot of the inner city kids suffer from asthma they're breathing lousy air down there. They're still burning coal in some buildings, although admittedly that's gone away in large part. But a lot of them are still burning lousy oil, diesel oil, things like that. Bad, whatever the oil is, number 5 or whatever the heck it is. It's not nearly as clean as natural gas. So to me, I find it unbelievable that you go into Pennsylvania and there's an economic boom. You go across the border. It's like East and West Berlin down there. And interestingly, in Pennsylvania, where fracking is taking place, it's like 75-80% in favor of it. They're living with it and they're in favor of it. Here in New York, we're not even really dealing with it, although we are. There are a lot of fracked wells, but people don't kind of view it that way. We have kind of not quite the opposite, but we have more opposed at this point than supportive. That's because they're getting fed a whole lot of propaganda. So my approach to that is proceed with caution, but proceed. You start out with, you do it safely. You start to try. You don't do what Andrew Cuomo typically does, which is go all the way right away. Don't do that. Start out. Don't frack near an aquifer. Don't frack near a reservoir. But let's start fracking. Let's start pulling some gas out of the ground and see what happens. And like I said, there's 5,000 wells out there that are fracked. Go out to the western part of the state. There's gas wells all over the place. So, and you get the typical, well, you can light your water on fire. You go to the Helderbergs and light your water on fire, and there's no fracking taking place. It's just naturally methane flows, and there's faucets out there that you can light on fire. Nothing to do with fracking.
Have you, there's a lot of the talk about fracking has to do with the chemicals involved in the process. Have you heard anything about that?
I am well versed in what the chemicals are. They're in common use in every day. Oh. Yeah. There's a whole other. Yes, I'm well versed in it. Let me just put it that way. My brother is in the process of rolling out a company that I'll be involved in, that we can take frack water and literally make it medical grade, drinkable, 99.99% pure water, cleaner than the water that you gave me, by the way. No, but it is cleaner than the water we're drinking. Not only can we do that, we can take the chemicals out of the water and resell them to the frackers. So you can separate the chemicals, isolate them, resell them back. So it's a closed loop. So that's less fresh water that we need because we're recycling it into clean. That's less chemicals that you need, and less transportation because you don't have to put it on a railroad and move it, or a truck and move it quite as far. You may have to have some shipping, unless you're located right where the well is, but you're not shipping it the way they are now. So it is, I am well versed in what the chemicals are, and none of them are outrageously bad, and they're things that are in common use every day. So now, that being said, do you just say do whatever you want? No, not at all. You have to have the regulations, and in fact the gas companies will tell you, regulate us, let us know what the rules are, we will play by your rules, but give us a shot at tapping into this gas. Right now what's happening is the gas getting sipped out from underneath our feet anyway, from Pennsylvania down on the southern border. But still, be that as it may, there's still a couple hundred years worth of gas. That's just in New York. And the Marcellus Shale is one of the richest gas regions in the nation. And you look at what's happened in Texas. It is booming. They're picking up 1,000 people a day. Go back to the minimum wage discussion we had. I guarantee you in North Dakota, nobody's worried about the minimum wage because they're making $25 an hour at McDonald's, because that's what the market will bear. Minimum wage is irrelevant out there because unemployment's non-existent. If you want a job, you have a job. They're closing some restaurants because they can't get workers. Why? Because they can make a ton of money in the oil fields and gas fields. So you talk about a rising tide lifting all boat. It's an economic boom that it's almost like a gift from God under our feet, and we have a governor that won't even make a decision. And I'd be, at this point, make the decision. If it's yes, it's yes. If it's no, it's no. But to string New Yorkers along for 4 years because you're afraid of what the politics of this thing are, and you're afraid of what I would say the radical environmental left, including Bobby Kennedy, who, by the way, 5 years ago was a huge fan of natural gas, but then he began to invest in wind and solar. And suddenly, natural gas became the enemy. It's funny how that worked. But 5 years ago, Bobby Kennedy was all on board with natural gas. One of the bigger hypocrites in the country, by the way. But anyway, it's a whole different thing.
All right, I've got one more for you. Have you heard about the Kinder Morgan's Tennessee gas pipeline that is proposed to run through northern Columbia County?
Yeah, amazingly, it doesn't touch my district. It comes awfully close, but it's not really right through. It's more Dede and Pete Lopez district-wise. So I'm certainly watching it, paying attention to it, but it hasn't been an every single day occurrence for me. It hasn't, just because it's not running through my district, but it's close. It's definitely close. So
I know it's going through New Lebanon and
a little bit, yeah,
in Canaan.
Yeah,
and,
but I haven't had a lot of pushback, to be honest with you. I've had a few, but not a lot of pushback on that. I get a lot more in the casino up in East Greenbush. That's more of a on my radar on a daily basis. This has been relatively quiet at this point. There hasn't been a lot of push for or against. It's just relatively quiet.
Do you have a stance on the issue at all?
Not yet. I'm still sort of looking at it and learning it and seeing what's going on, but not a specific stance that I could, articulate on it. We're just sort of watching it now and kind of continue to read. I get big, thick packages quite often from them, so we continue to look and see what's going on, but I haven't really staked a position on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's your stance on the casino? Because your opponent is pro-casino. So.
Yeah, I'm a little bit. My own personal belief is they do not represent economic development in any way, shape, or form. If they did, Atlantic City would be booming, New Jersey would have all of its problems solved, and meanwhile they're closing casinos. It doesn't represent economic development. I think it represents a sick economy, not a healthy economy. Overwhelmingly, experts will tell you that the money from a casino comes from about a 75-mile radius around that casino. So what are you doing? You're pulling money out of your own residents' pockets. All of that being said, I've been very quiet on it and kind of neutral on it, and here's why. The people of New York voted for it. They got fed a bill of goods with illegal bill language, by the way, that the governor changed before. The bill language is supposed to be very neutral. Do you support expanded casino gambling or not? It's not supposed to be, we're going to cut taxes, it's all sunshine and lollipops, everybody gets a pony. That's not what the language is supposed to be, but that's the way they changed the bill. They changed the language after the date that anybody could sue. And of course they got sued, and in court the defense was it's too late to sue, which was correct, but they created that situation by issuing the language after the date you could sue. So people got fed a bill of goods, but nonetheless they voted yes. They probably shouldn't have, but they did. So now, including East Greenbush, by the way, the town of East Greenbush voted yes. And now a lot of the anti-casino folks tell me, well, we didn't know it was coming here. I'm like, but of course not. They weren't going to tell you where it was going to go. I advocated for citing language in the bill, said we needed it. We should have had citing language before doing any of this. And by the way, casinos are tied to the SAFE Act. I'll get to that in a second. But I've been very neutral on it because, look, I represent East Greenbush. I don't represent Rensselaer, and I don't represent House Caverns or any of the other areas. The only area that I represent is East Greenbush. So it's, although I don't think it represents a big part of economic growth strategy, nonetheless, it's a big shot in the arm for a few years there until eventually those revenues begin to drop and they come to us and ask that they pay less money, which I know will come sooner rather than later. But for a number of years, East Greenbush stands to benefit to the tune of like $6 million a year. How do I, as a representative, say no to that? So do I want to be driving through Rensselaer, which is right where Monolith Solar is, and see a casino sitting there, and the town I represent doesn't have that? If you go, my approach really has been, I don't think any of them should be built, but if you're going to build them, then I think I'd say I'll take it in my district. Because when they were talking about Albany, and people were saying to me, well, let's build it over in Albany. I said, well, here's the problem. We're going to get all of the problems associated with a casino. We're not going to have the revenue to try to fix some of those problems, problem gambling, things like that. And there's going to be issues. There's no doubt. But I'm kind of a libertarian on that issue. It's people's money. If they want to gamble, go ahead. It's not my thing. I'm not a big gambler, but if you want to do it, go ahead. But to roll it out as economic development is just simply fallacy. So a little bit agnostic on it, kind of, if it's going to be built, let's build it in the district. And the way it's tied to the SAFE Act is you notice that none of this was on the table at all until the SAFE Act was passed. Andrew Cuomo's numbers began to tank upstate. A couple of years ago, he was talking about a big, giant casino down at Aqueduct. When the SAFE Act was passed, and they looked at these numbers upstate, which are plummeting, he said we have to do something, and magically, suddenly, here came casinos out of the blue. Also with the threat, because originally the casino operators did not want them. Saratoga didn't want it up here. Nobody wanted more of them. But the threat, as always with this governor, was if you don't do it my way, I'm going to line New York City with 5,000 slot machines and nobody will come upstate. Now what do you want to do? So the operator said, okay, I guess we better be in favor of casinos now. So.
Is there? I don't have any more questions. Do you guys have questions?
Yeah, you've done a very thorough job. Is there anything that he didn't ask you about? I know we covered a lot.
Yeah, we covered a lot. We hit a lot of the a lot of stuff there. I think we hit all the big talking points for sure. Casinos, Common Core, corruption. No, I think we hit a lot of stuff. New York is just. I continue to run because I think it just pains me to see a state declining. To be number 50. The ALEC book just showed up on my desk the other day, and Legislative Economic Outlook. We're number 50. How can New York be the 50th as far as economic outlook goes? How does the Empire State ever accept that we could be dead last in economic outlook? And that's why I continue to fight and continue to pound away every day. It's just too great of a state to be declining and suffering and losing people. We've lost 400,000 people in New York in the past 4 years, 600,000 in the past decade. So it's accelerating. South Carolina is going to have a Brooklyn accent pretty soon because everybody's just packing up and going. And I can't ever blame anybody for leaving, but I can try to fix it so they don't have to leave. And overwhelmingly, I get that. I don't want to leave. I have to leave. I have no opportunities here. I'm retired. My pension only goes so far. I got to go. So that's a problem long term as families disintegrate, start to spread apart and move apart, and they're talking via Skype instead of across the table on Sunday dinner. That's the stuff that keeps me going every day, is that we're too great. We're too great of a state to be doing this. We're supposed to be leading the way, not this malaise, not this attitude that sort of has set in where we're accepting decline. I don't accept it. So I continue to fight those policies that I think are causing the decline.
Nothing from me, no,
Great.
thanks.
Well, thank
Excellent.
you.
Hey,